And now that you've heard the Medicaid changes and all the things that happened, some good with the asset and income levels, but the independent assessment process has created issues for people that our next panel is going to explore. And so I want to introduce the panel, the Connor and Pierro Connor and Strauss, my other partner, Aaron Connor, who is our litigation head and a managing partner at the firm. Aaron, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Lou. And I just wanted to briefly mention that this has been a memorable program all 12 years that I've been here, but this year I'm going to remember it as the time that Lou sat at the kids' table during a legislative meeting. So. All right. So I can't really see the monitor, so I'm just going to run the best we can. So we have a number of people on this panel who are very important and can be very helpful when we are in this space. We have Frank Hemming, who does all of our Medicaid work. Been doing our Medicaid work, I think, for 7 or 8 years, although I'm sure it feels like longer, Frank.
Yeah, I figured today I was just going to be known as Frank who didn't buy breakfast.
That's fine. I think that works. We also have Melissa Groves, who's compliance manager from Consumer Directed Choices, which I'm sure some of you know, but if you don't know about them, they're can be a very important role in home care, and we hope that you will utilize them. We have Sarah Grimes from NYSARC. We have Valerie, who I'm sure you're now familiar with. And we also have Suzanne Paolucci, who's a care manager and the rock star of the fair hearing. So we'll get into that as we go along. We wanted to talk about a real scenario. So a lot of what we do is we talk about policy, we talk about what's happening, but without a real person, it doesn't really hit home. So we had a really representative case of Stan, and Stan has been gracious enough for us to change some of the facts of his case, but to really share his experience and what's going on. He's 66. He's retired from working for New York State. He lives in the capital region. He was private paying for his own care and needed some Medicaid assistance. And as you could see, he has some mobility issues. Medicaid gave him a shockingly low number. And this is, in my opinion, this is why we have programs like this, so people can age in place. And it really, there's the basis of potentially saying that, as Valerie said, well, you didn't get any help in the last 3 days, you must be independent. Well, I think we all know that that's a fallacy. So without further ado, we have a nice little video that Beth has prepared to talk about this.
66-year-old Stanley has lived in this house all his life. It's the home his grandparents bought over 100 years ago, with generations of family members pictured on the walls. Retired after 30 years with New York State as a tax auditor, he managed independently until he required a wheelchair for mobility.
I was born cerebral palsy.
1, 2, 3. And up.
Stanley's aides assist him with most daily activities, transferring him to and from bed, to his chair, and in the bathroom, showering, dressing, and preparing all meals.
There you go.
Stanley's goal is to remain at home, so he completed legal documents to protect the house and a pooled income trust, qualifying financially for Community Medicaid. He hired 2 home aides through Consumer Directed Choices, but getting Medicaid to pay for it?
Well, the way Medicaid changed, it's been a nightmare.
Stanley's doctors report that he needs 16 hours of care each day, but under New York's new system with an independent assessor, that determines the level of home care Medicaid will pay for. And Stanley was granted only 5 hours of care a day.
All right, you ready?
All right.
Okay.
1.
Stanley pushed back, filing a grievance with the help of his care manager. Yet only 1 additional hour was granted for a total of 6 per day, forcing Stan to make up the difference to the tune of over $100,000 so far.
That rate, I probably would run out of money year and a half.
Stanley says the state's Medicaid laws are working against his dream of remaining at home. His primary caregiver agrees.
Stan's worked for, the state for 30 years. I think that, we should be giving back. And he deserves it. He deserves the help. He deserves the care.
Stanley is determined to have Medicaid cover all home care costs. He appealed, and a fair hearing is pending.
So-called forms that the Medicaid that they enacted have to be looked at. And most of them, if not repealed, seriously revised because they have gone the opposite direction.
So in Stan's case, he is unmarried and have no children, so he'll probably live forever without those stressors, but we need to prepare for that. Okay. He has several siblings who can help out, although, you know, everybody has a busy life and they can't be there all the time. And Stanley has used aids through consumer directed choices. These are obviously not Stan's true financials, but for matters of discussion, his Social Security income is $22.15. He receives a pension and he gets an IRA or a deferred comp or any type of retirement distribution. And that gives us his monthly income. We then deduct his Medicare Part B. And then we see that we need to use a pooled trust for about $3,600 a month. And you can see his other assets, his house, his retirement account, and some cash. And of course, we have the Medicaid allowance of $30,182 because why make it a round number, right? He has been smart. He's done some planning. He has a will, he has a power of attorney, which is very important. Obviously, in a case like this, if he becomes incapacitated, the trust is also very important. Healthcare proxy. So he's done his legwork. Now, what is the state going to do for him? I'm going to turn it over to Frank for this purpose.
Thank you. I'm Echo. It's really good to see everybody in the room again. This is my, I think, 7th forum because one forum I was on vacation and my bosses are all in the room. So they just tell me I get to do these kinds of things, but it's really good to see everybody. So let's talk a little bit more about like Stan and his case and what we're doing here. So we've already met Stan, right? We saw the video, we saw what this actually looks like in person, right? When Greg was up here talking about how it's really good to look at numbers and data, I'm the last person that's going to say we shouldn't be doing those things, but on an individual level, we also have to remember that these are individuals that we're looking to serve here. It's not just numbers all the time, it's actually people. So with that said, we know who Stan is. So let's continue going down here. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay. So we talk about Medicaid eligibility. Sorry, going the wrong way. There we go. Oh. How's this going? Oh, here we go. Okay, there's a back button. I'm sorry.
You have a power of attorney, Frank?
I might need a guardianship. That's really the problem. Here we go. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So we got numbers here, right? And Valerie went through these, and then notice the take home portion of this is the numbers are up, and that's great because if we did this program in December of last year, it would have been $954 of income. It would have been $16,800 of assets. Those numbers are up. That's great. That's good. We want more people to get on programs. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We have a lot of exempt assets that a lot of people just don't know about. Right? You get your $30,182 of your assets, you get a prepaid burial. Doesn't really matter how much you pay for that, weirdly enough. So if you have $20,000 extra and you want to put it in $20,000 in a prepaid burial, there's technically nothing that says you can't do that. If you have income producing property, so we do have people that have businesses, although it's not something that we commonly see because we serve a lot of people that are older and disabled, but if you do have an active business, weirdly enough, you can be on Medicaid where that active business is an exempt asset. You can have life insurance. It can't be a lot of it. The face value of it has to be $1,500 or less, which weirdly enough was just the amount that it took to bury you in 1965 when Medicaid became a program, and they haven't indexed that for inflation. So if you want to die, that's great. Medicaid wants you to die, but just have a little bit of insurance to cover it. Big one that we counsel clients on all the time, probably more than just about any other thing up here, is that IRA. Is that 401, 403, 457, straight IRA, whatever it is. If it's a tax exempt retirement account, As long as it's in periodic payment status, which happens automatically at 73 now, it's exempt for Medicaid purposes. So you don't have to spend that down. If you ever are out in the field working with the populations that you work with, if people say, I need Medicaid, but I have too much money because I have this large IRA, 401, whatever it is, do not have them spend it down, please, without talking to somebody like us or the other people and professionals in the room. That is not an asset if it's done properly. And if you spend the money, as good as we are, we can't get it back. And we hear, unfortunately, still too many times where people got bad advice, spent the money, and then we can't get it back. And if you have the need for Medicaid and you're not 73, we just put it in payment status early. That will exempt the account. So you don't have to be at 73 or older for this exemption. You just have to do a little more work up front. And weirdly enough, you can have one car. I think the strangest part with this is you can have one car regardless of whether this is home or nursing home. So you can be in the nursing home with the Maserati, nothing in the bank, and $1 million IRA. And congratulations, you are eligible for Medicaid. All right, continuing on. So Beth did a really good job of this in the video, better than I could do myself. So I wanted to just point out again, with Stan's specific situation, he specifically wanted to protect his house because of what it means to him, what it's meant to his family. So how do we do that? So in order to create eligibility for Medicaid, we create some things for him. We create a Medicaid asset protection trust for his assets. So in this case, it would be his house. And then we create an income trust or a pooled trust. And I promised Sarah I wouldn't talk too much about that because that's why she's on the panel. So continuing on for the trust. We have a Medicaid asset protection trust. We use it all the time as planners. It's probably our most utilized tool in our toolbox, where we put things into it to make it look like our individual who's applying is poor or impoverished. The idea that most people that we see is we ask, do you want to be poor and apply for Medicaid, or do you want to look poor and apply for Medicaid? And so far, the vast majority of people would rather just look poor without being poor. So to accomplish that, we create this trust. We put in their home, their assets, their life insurance, their brokerage accounts, whatever it is that makes them ineligible. That gets it off the table for Medicaid purposes immediately, gets the 5-year clock rolling, and essentially creates almost immediate eligibility for home care services. Like Valerie said before, though, there is the 5-year look back for nursing home, so you can't just throw things in a trust and then get eligible immediately for nursing home. That's important. So there are some features with the trust that we always like to counsel people about. You can choose your initial trustee, but you can fire them at any time. So typically this would be kids, other family members, right? If you don't make a good choice or something changes in their lives, you can always boot your trustee. That's usually my favorite part of the meeting because mom or dad gets to look at the kid and say, guess what? You still got to do what I want. You can also choose your initial beneficiaries. And if something in your life changes and that doesn't make the most sense for you anymore, you can also then change your beneficiaries. So that's important. If you're doing your plan early and you're getting out in front of this 5 years before you need that nursing home, right? We only know what your life looks like when we do the plan. It may change. So the nice thing about the trust is the trust can change just like your wishes can change. And weirdly enough, and I know this might be hard to believe, but I think we say this every time that we talk about this. Even though it says it's irrevocable, you can revoke an irrevocable trust as long as you get the consent of all the beneficiaries. So they're drafted very carefully to make sure that they are very flexible. And if your plan doesn't go the way that we intend, that we can always undo it. But at the end of the day, we're lawyers, and how much can you actually trust anything that we actually say? Sorry. So trusts, we like them so much because at the end of the day, one of the big things that they do besides create eligibility is they keep everybody out of court. Because if there's one thing that we as attorneys really, really like is when people go to court, because it just means that people get to pay us. Weirdly enough, we counsel people all the time. You don't want to pay us more money than you have to, right? Do the trust so that way you don't have to pay someone like Aaron to go litigate your case because people were contesting your will. Other things that the trusts give us the flexibility to do is actually gives us the ability to create downstream planning. So we do a lot of now protection for not only the Medicaid person during their life, but we want to protect the assets when they pass to the next generation, be that kids, grandchildren, siblings, whoever it is. Sometimes it makes sense to not just hand them money, right? If you have a disabled person in your life or a special needs person, you don't want to just hand them money because if they're on benefits, the last thing you want is for them to get money and then become ineligible for their programs and get kicked off everything. So instead, we would layer, in that instance, a supplemental needs trust into the plan, just to make sure that everything goes as intended. And the bigger thing with Stan's case specifically is when we did this trust for him, when we put in his house, that essentially created immediate Medicaid eligibility. So that allowed us to kind of then go down the road towards getting him the care that he needed in his house. Valerie touched on this, so I'm not really going to, but we did have the new rules that are taking effect next year with the new look back. So that's not something we're seeing now. We have regional rates. This is how they calculate the penalty periods for the nursing home currently. This is what they will use if and when that look back period comes into play for community benefits. So we thought it was important just to have them in the materials. And then once we got Stan on Medicaid, right, then the question is, well, what home care programs we want to enroll with? Valerie just did a very good job of laying out like managed long-term care and some of the issues that we're seeing with that. But again, it's important with someone like Stan, or just because of the general health or the home care worker shortage that we're seeing, that we be very cognizant of programs like the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, because at the end of the day, as much as everyone wants to remain in their house, until we get the aid shortage figured out, the main way that people are remaining in their house is through the Consumer Directed Program, where you can hire and fire your own aides. I'm just going to talk very quickly about the NIA piece of this. Again, Valerie was touching on this, so I'm not going to go step by step through this, but we did put this in the material. So this is a graphical representation of pretty much everything that happens once you get into the NIA process. And while we could certainly go step by step through this, I think pictures in this instance are very important, and that's a mess, right? We're not going to sugarcoat that for many, many reasons. Between we can't get assessments scheduled, they won't talk to the right people, we got to do conference calls, we can't get the doctors available, whatever it is. So in the end of the day, this is the reality that we're seeing. And then we come back to Stan, and the reality with Stan was Stan came to us and he was already paying privately for 16 hours a day of help. We tried to get him on Medicaid quickly. We got that approval. He went through the NIA process. They gave him 5 hours of help. He did a grievance. They said, right, Stan, we're really sorry. We didn't get this right. We're going to make it right. You get a whole 1 additional hour of care. I hope that's really good for you. At the end of the day, that wasn't where we wanted to go. So we did ultimately file for a fair hearing, which we did attend several weeks ago, and now we're awaiting decision on that. And I couldn't, again, if you just want to read another impactful quote from Stan, it's here in the materials about how this isn't working. This isn't working for him. And I'm sure, you know, this is just representative of what what a lot of you are seeing in the room of what it looked like for your clients. So with that said, I'm going to get away from the podium. I'm going to hand back off to Sarah, who's going to come talk about pooled trusts and how they fit into all this.
You just check that I know. All right, what way I'm going. I'm a little shorter, sorry. Good afternoon or morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Grimes from NYSARC Trust Services. Wonderful to be back here, and thank you so much to the entire Pierro Strauss team for putting on this amazing event every year. It's always great. And I like that we have a little bit of a new spin on today's case study. So looking at the income limits, as Frank mentioned, this is all good news. Income limits are up this year. That means that if people are applying, these are the new limits they need to look at when they're considering what their spend down might be. It also means that some of the clients that you're working with who are already receiving Medicaid services and have a spend down might not have one anymore, or they might have a lower spend down. So again, really important. I'll talk about what to do with the pooled trust a little bit later, but that's good news. And we're very excited to have that. So let's look at Stanley's income. He's got over $500 a month. As Frank mentioned, we're looking at all sources of his income. So it's going to be a Social Security check. We've got a pension check. And also, in order to exempt that retirement account, he's got to be taking money out of it. So that counts towards his income, right? So you see that represented on the slide. That brings us his total monthly income. We're going to deduct out some of his eligible deductions, things that are going to reduce his income. And we come to about a little over $3,600 a month that he's over the limit. Okay, so this is the amount he's over the threshold to qualify for Medicaid, and that's what he's going to be required to deposit into a pooled trust. His other option would be to pay that money to Medicaid or use it towards medical bills. That would not allow him to use it for his living expenses. And he'd be forced to go into a nursing home potentially because he can no longer afford to stay at home. So the pooled trust is an alternative option to that. As long as he has a qualifying disability, he's still going to be able to keep up to $1,697 in his bank account every month, and he will deposit the remaining balance of his monthly income into a pooled trust. He's going to do it electronically every month. That's certainly the easiest way, is to set up an electronic deposit from your bank account, and he's going to do that on the 4th of each month. Now, this is just to give you guys a little bit of overview of what a pooled trust is. The goal of this program is to allow Stanley to live independently and comfortably in the home and community that he loves among his family and loved ones for as long as possible. This is also an irrevocable supplemental needs trust. It's a special type of trust, different from the type of trust we're doing for assets. This is just for the income in this situation. It can also protect assets down the road, but for this particular purpose, we're using it for his income. You do the pooled trust when you go to apply for the Medicaid benefit. The asset protection trust is something you do in advance. So now that he needs the services, he's going to set up this trust. It's going to allow us to preserve his hard-earned income minus the nominal cost of using the trust, and allows him to use that to pay things like his rent, mortgage, utility bills, food expenses, the things that he needs to live independently. This is truly a lifeline for seniors and people with disabilities. It is often the only way that someone's going to be able to qualify for these services. These funds are managed by a nonprofit like NYSARC. And again, as I mentioned, you do need to have a qualifying disability in order to use this program. This is a nice little graph to just give you an overview of how the trust works and the flow of the money, right? So Stanley is going to deposit his spend down electronically into the pooled trust every month. And then in order to utilize the funds, he needs to make disbursement requests. He submits a request to the trust asking us to pay a bill that's in his name, certain things can be set up automatically every month, like a bill that's the same amount every month. We can automate it. Doesn't have to send it in every time, but we do need documentation. Medicaid wants to know how this money is being used, and they want to know that it's being used for his primary benefit. So bills in his name, items and services that are for Stanley. And we're always going to pay a third party. We can never give Stanley money out of this account, and we cannot put money into his checking account. That makes the money available to him. Medicaid would consider it his. So what we do is we pay a third party, the landlord to pay the rent, the utility company, or a sibling who's going to go out and buy something for him, and then we can reimburse that person. That's a really important rule. One other thing is this is a wonderful benefit. Medicaid is allowing you to access these services even though you're not financially eligible. So what they have a rule, since it's your own money funding this trust and you're the Medicaid applicant, you can use it during your lifetime, but upon your death, if there's money in that account, it's going to either go to repay Medicaid for the services provided to you during your lifetime, or if it's in a pool trust, it's generally retained by that nonprofit organization. And it has to be used to help other people with disabilities that are served by that nonprofit. So very important that people are spending these funds regularly, and they should be. They're putting that money in and automatically paying it out within that month to cover their expenses. So there should not be a large balance in the trust. Just want to touch on before we go into more about what Stanley's trust will be used to pay for, just some of the impact of the 2023 rules for individuals utilizing pooled trusts and those that have Medicaid spend downs. Obviously, as we mentioned, we've got reduced spend downs. Some people may no longer have one, or they have a lower one. What do? I've got a lot of questions. How do you contact the trust? You stop sending them money. Okay, if you no longer have a spend down, you don't need to pay that anymore. If you have electronic deposits set up, you should cancel them. Call the trust, they will walk you through that. We'll also be able to release all the funds in your account so they're available for you to spend. You spend them down, and you should spend them down as quickly as possible because you're going to still incur monthly fees while you have that account open. Okay, so if you have clients with questions about that, just encourage them to contact their pool trust. We'll walk them through that. This is great news for people. We're also seeing that some of these higher income limits are affecting other subsidized benefits. Some people got a nice bump in their COLA for Social Security, and they got a nice bump in the income limits, and it's actually affecting some of their subsidized benefits that it's actually created a loss for them. They're not actually gaining anything, and that's tough to hear. It's been somewhat challenging. I'm hoping that some of these other agencies will get all together and look at some of these rates that haven't been changed in a long time. We're seeing a lot of increased requests because of the lower hours that people are getting to supplement care by paying for that out of the pooled trust. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Informal care arrangements. Again, families are really having to go deep into the woodwork to figure out how to hire people that are going to show up, be there and help their parent. They have a good relationship, and that can be difficult when we're transitioning from that informal care arrangement to a Medicaid funded arrangement. And I do also want to take a moment to point out, we talked about community Medicaid look back. When we were here last year, we were talking about community Medicaid look back coming and how that may mean that someone would have to spend down the funds in their pooled trust on a monthly basis. That is not yet in effect. So at this time, the rules still currently allow Stanley to use his money, and whatever he does not use, it will roll over to that next month. So important. We got a few questions about that today and just wanted to make sure you guys got that information. So here's Stanley's amount he's putting into the trust every month. And so what we want to do when we're sitting down with families and trying to help them explain how the trust would work, we want to take the amount they're putting in every month, deduct out the cost of the pool trust services, and that's about the money that they're going to have to work with approximately each month. Now, keep in mind, this isn't his only money. He has $16.97 in his checking account. He has up to $30,000 in assets available to him, and then he's got this money in the trust. So when you're thinking about what to use the trust for, we want to look at bills in his name, things that we can make payments electronically to those vendors. If it's something we can automate, that's going to just make the process easier for Stanley. As you can see, Stanley's got a lot going on. He doesn't have the time to be sending us receipts and bills all the time. We want to try and make this as efficient as possible for him. So he's no longer has a mortgage, but we are going to look at paying things like his maintenance for his property, expenses, things like his property taxes, and other sort of things he may need. Maybe needs a new appliance, things like that. We can get really creative in helping to make sure that people get to use the majority of the funds in their account. And we're also going to potentially have to help supplement some of the care. If he's not able to win the full 16 hours, we're going to have to use some of the funds in the trust to help him private pay to cover that gap. So I'm going to turn things over. But again, this is where we're looking at. These are the sources of funding that Stanley has in order to cover these expenses. And as he himself noted in the video, that's not going to last for very long. So let's talk about what we can do next to help. Melissa, I'm going to turn things over to you.
All right, so someone is not asking me if I have a power of attorney. Which button do I hit on the slide? Up, down? The big one. Thank you. So my name is Melissa Groves. I'm the compliance manager at Consumer Directed Choices. And my portion of the program is to talk to you about how Stanley makes his consumer directed personal assistance program work for him. So just a quick show of hands. How many people in the room are familiar with CDPA, have heard of it? Excellent. I love that I see a lot of hands. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, what you see here is basically your textbook definition according to the rules and regulations of New York State, what CDPA is. I'm going to kind of give you a quick and dirty version. It's a statewide Medicaid program that provides an alternative way of receiving home care services where the consumer or someone like Stan has more control over who provides their care and how it's provided. So rather than assigning a home care agency or a vendor of some sort that controls the selection, training, and scheduling of aides, the consumer, or Stanley in this case, thank you, or the family member or a family member, friend, or guardian can be appointed if a consumer is not able to do these things on their own, would be directing their care, and they perform all of these functions that would usually be done by a vendor. So in thinking about this, I wanted to give you some key terms and some good definitions that I think will help you as we talk about Stanley and other people that use the program as we go along. These definitions are directly from York Code's rules and regulations, which would be NYSARC 505.28, which is actually what governs the CDPA program. The program is structured really so that anyone can use it. Even when you think of someone that needs assistance with hiring workers, completing that hire paperwork to complete the process of having them work, scheduling, etc., anyone really can use the program. Because remember, I mentioned a family member, such as a parent, son or daughter caring for aging parents, another family member or trusted friend of the family can act as a designated representative on behalf of the consumer. Stan falls into the category of a self-directing consumer. So he is hiring his own staff, scheduling them to suit his needs, and managing his care of plan. Under CDPA, Stan has a lot of flexibility in who can provide his care because there are very few exclusions in who can be hired to work as a personal assistant. He can't hire his spouse, which we know he doesn't have one. He can't hire anyone under the age of 18. And if he needed to DR, the designated representative cannot be hired as a personal assistant. One other thing that I think is really great about consumer directed choices is that, and the CDPA program in general, is that we've mentioned that Stan has a number of health issues. So CDPA allows him to train his personal assistants to complete tasks that you might think would typically be done by a nurse. So it's all based on the level of comfort that he has for training his staff. So looking at this is basically the responsibility that a consumer or a designated representative would take on under the program. And Stan does, he takes on a fair amount of responsibility in managing his CDPA services. And while it may seem like a lot, the trade-off is that he has complete say in who comes into his home and provides his care. And that's huge. Personal care is messy. People often are uncomfortable talking about it. For someone that requires the kind of care that he does, it allows him to have a say in who comes in to provide his care at times when he may feel very vulnerable. When I joined CD Choices in 2005, I would have told you that CDPA was still a niche program. It was attractive to people who needed home care because they wanted to control their services more. Maybe they had a bad experience with a traditional agency, no disrespect, or they just wanted more control over when their care was provided. Fast forward to today, and we are now in a position where CDPA absolutely needs to exist because we are amid a home care worker shortage that is rapidly becoming a crisis. For someone like Stan, who requires a great deal of care, CDPA gives him a greater chance of filling his hours because it provides so much flexibility in who he can hire. Remember, we heard this morning, if you were here, some of our lawmakers, someone asked a question about unpaid family members that are providing care to people at home. Well, this allows a family member to get paid to provide that care, which is huge when you think about it. You have sons and daughters that are caring for aging parents at home that may feel like they've had to step back from their regular jobs. So there's a gap in their pay. This program is a win-win. It lets them get paid for the services that they're providing to their loved one. And in addition, their loved one has the care that they need and it's being provided by someone that they're comfortable with. So this talks about CD Choices or any fiscal intermediary's responsibilities. Stan's FI is responsible for the behind the scenes work that needs to happen so that he doesn't have to worry about things like wages, benefits, tracking due dates for his health assessments that his PAs need to have initially and annually, or even keeping personnel records for everyone that he hires. This frees him up to focus on ensuring his everyday care needs are met in the manner that he feels suits his life best. And that's really important. When we're talking about CDPA, he gets to choose how this works for him. So what happens next? You have somebody that's been approved. We already know Stan's been through the NIA process, even though it did not go how it was intended to go. And I think we can all agree that he has been shortchanged by the process. So once a consumer is approved for service, the FI is really kind of the last stop on the train. And this illustrates what came next for Stan to start his CDPA services. So we know that he has 2 personal assistants that he's hired with his FI. However, some of these pieces he may need to revisit. Every time Stan hires a new personal assistant, he'll need to complete the hiring documents with that personal assistant and submit them to his FI. His PA will need to have that initial health assessment before they can provide any care. That health assessment needs to be submitted and accepted by the FI. So there are pieces of this that he may have to repeat every time he needs to hire somebody. I'm going on the positive side here, and assuming that he wins that fair hearing and he is granted more hours, he will probably need to hire some additional staff to cover that 16 hours a day, which equates to 112 hours a week. He's going to need to think about some things and how he does that. One of those is overtime. Many FIs are not flexible about overtime, and they have a cap in place. So they will either say no overtime or you can't use more than a certain amount per week. My fiscal intermediary happens to be very flexible with the overtime. We usually preface it with the message of please use it responsibly. But we also recognize that people are having a really difficult time staffing, and that overtime is going to happen. In the case of Stan, 112 hours is a week. I would never, even if he has a fiscal intermediary that would allow him to use unlimited amounts of overtime, staffing it with 2 is dicey. It puts him at a position where he's going to have PAs that are working a lot of hours, 7 days a week. He could run into the risk of if someone left for any reason, he would need to scramble to find care. So my recommendation would always be more is better. The program really is structured that he has to have his own plan B, or any consumer using the program needs to have their own plan B. We actually advise and recommend that they hire as many people as they want to hire. They can have as many people that sit there as just a backup person to provide care in those emergency situations. And the reason why we do that is because we know life happens. Stan's personal assistants are going to have lives outside of their jobs that he's going to need to cover. So I would recommend that he hire 3 to 4. And that brings me to this, that I just want to leave you with one last thought about consumer directed choices. And I guess this would be where I get to do a little bit of a shameless plug, we'll say, for consumer directed choices. So I think everybody immediately goes to, when they're choosing a fiscal intermediary to work with, they immediately go to, what are you going to pay my personal assistants? Which is absolutely important. There's no denying that. But there's another piece of this that's important, and that is ongoing support. It's vital to Stan's success with the program and anybody else that's using the program. We happen to be really proud of the ongoing support that we provide our consumers, because they really are our customers. One of the things that we are most proud of, we've talked quite a bit about that workforce shortage that exists currently. So what are we doing to help our consumers? We actually have a workforce recruitment portal that is a web-based program that allows someone like Stan to go in. He can search people that have posted that they are looking for work. He can also post a job or many jobs, as many as he wants, where he can set it so that he has certain hours he's looking to fill. There's all sorts of criteria and filters that he can use to search out personal assistance, or what his needs are, what type of experience that he wants his personal assistants to have. He can even filter out like how close they are to his place of residence. So my message to everybody here in this room, because I suspect there are a lot of people that assist helping consumers set up this type of service, is help coach them on what they should be asking their FI, because I think these things are really important. And the last thing I'll say is thank you for including consumer directed choices in the program. And Stan, I really wish you the best of luck, and I hope everything goes in your way. And now I will turn it over to Suzanne.
I'm going to have Valerie. I want Valerie next to me. Taught me everything I know, first of all. But I also want her to chime in as needed. Just to give a perspective on what 6 hours looks like, I woke up at 6:30 this morning and we're coming on 12:30. So that's a 6 hour mark. Stanley, with his 6 hours, would have had to have gotten out of bed, and based on the video, I'm pretty sure he can't move side to side. He'd have to be bathed, toileted, fed his breakfast, lunch, and dinner, go to the bathroom for the last time, and have his medications, all in the next 10 minutes. That's 6 hours of care. When I first started doing Medicaid appeals, I was so enraged when I got my first denial. I called the Department of Health. And I said, this is like ridiculous. They want my client to wear a diaper for 12 hours. This is wrong. And I was fuming, just like you probably all are right now. And what they said to me is, Suzanne, we don't get involved in clinical matters. We just help you deal with if protocol is not being followed. So believe me, whenever protocol is not followed, I call the Department of Health and they're great. But I had to find a way how to help my clients. And I've been doing this for 5 years and I've done over 350 appeals. So it's not just because the NYI assessments are not working. It hasn't been working for a while. What I can tell you is my clients used to get 8 hours instead of 5 hours. So definitely there's been a decrease in what's being granted, but this monkey business has been going on for a while. So here's the good news. Of the 350 appeals I have done, I have successfully won all of them, be it 24-hour continuous care, live-in, or 12 hours. And it's not because I'm a rock star, or as someone once called a pit bull with lipstick. It's because the policies that are written are in favor of Stanley, not the managed care. And that's just really important to note. So how do you successfully get to that place where you can win an appeal? This is the time you have to build clinical information. I call it collateral clinical information. This is the time to enlist your doctors, to pull together the medical evidence that you need. Start with the nursing assessment. Those UAS assessments, I've read so many of them. Some of them give you everything you need to fight your appeal. These nurses are, if they're documenting well, and a lot of them do, I've never had one that was wrong. They've always documented very accurately, so that's good. I've yet to see one that was totally off. Pull that information, use it to your benefit. Encourage your clients to have conversations with their doctors. Start building medical evidence. Have the doctors start noting in their own notes the person's functionality. Stanley's doctor hopefully documented that he needs pretty much total assistance with bathing, dressing, and so forth. Make sure that's part of a note. I know they're no longer using medical forms. I have all my clients' doctors fill out those medical forms and I submit that with the appeal. If any social workers here that work in rehab facilities or hospitals, encourage the doctors to talk about functionality, to talk about overnight needs, document it somewhere in progress notes or in the medical chart. Request an IDT discharge summary and make sure the PTs and the OTs and the speech therapists are documenting what the person needs on a daily basis and for how much. I can't say how important that is because when I look at documentation, it's so lacking. It's just not there. So we have to build medical evidence. Write a log, show hour by hour what the person does, okay? And the other thing I always say is for families to write letters of attestation that they're there, they're supportive, but they're not necessarily wanting or able to provide the care. Their participation is voluntary. And the reason I say that is because I can't tell you how many times I hear from families, I was told I live with my loved one, I have to bathe, dress them and toilet them. I loved my father. I never once toileted him when he needed care. And I don't think he would want me to toilet him. It's a dignity issue for a lot of people. So I think it's just important to note that the evidence is there. You just have to pull it together, or you have to ask for it to be pulled together. And the managed care is really up a losing battle, but they're going to deny and delay, and hope the person dies so they don't have to pay. So, and it's true. And I prepare my families. I get clients that come to me, and I said, "You've done nothing wrong. This team did nothing wrong when they advocated for Stanley." But again, it's deny, delay, hope you don't have to pay. Like I said, I'm not a rock star. The policies are in place. I do think Stanley is going to prevail. And it's just unfortunate that he had to go through that ultimate stress of waiting for it and, being told you don't qualify for it. I've seen denials, and the reason I said about the toileting, I've seen denials that say, you know, we're allowed to use medical supplies, you know, if safely used, we can use medical supplies. I don't know if a toileting device, a diaper is a toileting device. And I didn't hear Greg Olson talk about any technology yet that can help someone toilet. So I think it's just important to put into perspective, these plans are not going to get punished for their clinical decisions. And maybe that's something down the road that we need to make sure does happen, because maybe this monkey business would stop. But I'm going to give the mic to Valerie, just to add anything.
Well, Suzanne is amazing. She is a rock star. It is, the advocacy for individual clients is tough. And I have a team and we win a lot of appeals, but it is a slog because you're up against a big insurance plan and they have a lot of resources. So, but a couple of tools, and you know what, I'll send Beth some information to post on. We have a fact sheet on our NY Health Access website, tips for requesting an increase in home care. So that'll be posted, a link to that, so you can get that. But so much of what Suzanne said is so true. Like, people come to us and they say, you know, they talk to the care manager, they ask, well, did you put anything in writing? Did you put in writing that I work and I have 2 children and I can't care for mom and at all, like, but I'm willing to be involved? No, I told her that. Well, guess what? It's never going to be in the record then. You've got to write things down and submit them. You ask, where can I fax this? I want it to be part of the record, because in that appeal, you want to be able to cite it. And if it's all just, this stuff doesn't get written down, it's invisible. They don't write it down. And as Suzanne said, we do have very favorable regulations in New York. There's a definition of 24-hour care that's very specific. It's specific for what the standards are for living, and it's specific for what the standards are for split shift. And this is in our fact sheet that you'll get the link for. And it comes up from labor law. You know, there's labor law says if that aide can't get 8 hours of alone time at night to sleep, and 5 of those 8 hours have to be continuous. So they get 5 hours of continuous uninterrupted time. Then they can't be required to do live-in. Well, you know, in any case where someone toileting, hello, you know, you can't really schedule it. I don't know about you, but like I made a rush and a break to the bathroom because you know, it's just a human function that happens. And of course, as you age and with disability, it can happen more frequently. And right. And we want people to remain continent. So if you do not help someone to the bathroom when they need to go, guess what? They lose the ability to be continent, because they'll go in the diaper then. And then those muscles, it's muscles. They lose their strength, and the person then loses their memory and awareness of it. And that's what causes incontinence ultimately, right? The slippery slope. So, you know, and doctors know this. They can say this in their statements, right? And the logs are so important. When I just mentioned what that standard is for 24-hour care, does the person need help so that an aide can't sleep for 5 hours? Well, how do you show that? The family member, the live-in aide is staying there. They keep a log. And sometimes they give us a log and they say, you know what? You don't meet the standard for split shift. Not everybody does. I mean, and that's the reality, right? Everybody's on a bell curve, right? You know, the concept of a bell curve, there are people who need a little care. There are people who need a lot of care, and most people are in the middle. So not everybody needs the highest amount of care. If that happens to be who comes to us for help, right? Because they don't come to us when they need 4 hours a day. They can get that, right? If that's all this gentleman needed, they wouldn't need the help of the firm, right? But they come to us because they need a lot of care, and that's why they come to you. Just a little pitch about, the state response to your complaint. We don't monitor medical necessity. We don't monitor clinical. Well, you know what? The state could be doing a lot better job. Yes, maybe they don't get in there and second guess the plan and how many hours. But shouldn't they be looking at, well, how much care is this plan giving? Is there care on a bell curve, or are 90% of their members getting under 4 hours a day? And you know what? They know that because the plans file reports every quarter. They're called MCOR reports that they file every quarter that show the percentage of their members getting different amounts of care from the lowest bucket to the highest bucket. Well, guess what is not public? Those reports.
And we'll
Well-
have to leave it at that.
Okay, but what on the portal, I will post links to the MLTC Data Transparency Project where you can see some of this data and you will be shocked at how little care plans are providing. And you can call on the state for more accountability.
Thank you, everybody, and I'm gonna turn it back over to Luke.
All right. And in working in this area for over 40 years, working with a lot of people who have special needs, we call it other abled individuals, there's a motto that they always said, and that is nothing about me without me. And so today I'm happy to introduce to you none other than Stan. Come on up, Stan. It takes people willing to put their personal situations on the line. It takes people to be recognized. And we want to thank Stanley for being with us today and for allowing us to help others with your case. Thank you, Stan.